Hey everybody, welcome back to another Muck Rack Live. It's great to have you all here. I'm Greg Galant, the co-founder and CEO of Muck Rack. Now we've done a bunch of these Muck Rack Lives already, but this is our most meta Muck Rack Live because Muck Rack Live is in fact a virtual event of sorts. And we know many of you in the PR community are producing virtual events or thinking of attending virtual events. And journalists out there listening, you're covering virtual events, and we want to unpack it, figure out what are virtual events all about, how do journalists view them. We have an excellent panel to dig into this issue with me today. But before I introduce them, I want to invite all of you to send us your questions using the hashtag MuckRackLive. And it's very cool. We are simultaneously streaming this to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. You can post on any of those platforms with that hashtag MuckRackLive. We will get the questions and I will ask those questions to our panel. So please send in your questions. Now, without further ado, I'd like to start introducing our panel. First up, Leigh Nordstrom, the editor at Women's Wear Daily. Leigh, please introduce yourself and welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. My name is Leigh Nordstrom. I am the editor at WWD. I've been at Women's Wear Daily since 2015. I started as a reporter on the desk, and I have edited the section since 2018. The is WWD's long-running arts, culture, society, events, parties beat, and we have done historically a lot of kind of society socialite coverage, as that has evolved into celebrity culture. We do a lot of celebrity features, Hollywood, film, music, all of that. And we have a large event coverage business. We, in normal times, have many events that we're covering between New York, LA, London, Milan, and Paris. And these days, some virtual events as well.
Great, thanks, Leigh. I'd also like to welcome Michael Cubie, the editor-at-large at Them and entertainment writer at NYLON. Welcome, Michael.
Hello, hi, my name is Michael Cubie. I am the editor-at-large for Condé Nast's LGBTQ platform, Them, where I've been since 2017. I'm also an entertainment writer for NYLON magazine, where I've been since 2020. I primarily cover film, TV, some fashion. I'm also a freelance culture and fashion writer for publications like Vogue, Teen Vogue, and Vulture and Paper. And yeah, I'm very excited to be here today.
Great. So, why don't we start off with like why we're doing virtual events now? Tell me what it was like for each of you, like the first regular event that was canceled for you, right, as the pandemic started, and then the first virtual event that you covered, or at least, the most memorable one that stood out for you.
I remember the first day we were working from home at WWD. It was March 12th, and that night I was supposed to cover the Frick Museum's Young Fellows Ball, and kind of felt very much like, is this going to be happening? Things were, at those days, every day things were changing so rapidly and so extremely. And around mid-afternoon, we got an email saying that they were canceling the event. And at that time, a lot of the spring, it was in the midst of the spring social season, and a lot of the events, they didn't know, they weren't able to scramble to do something virtual at the time. So a lot of things were canceled or postponed. So that was kind of the first, where I was sort of going, okay, a lot of these springtime events are not going to be happening. Also, the cancellation of South by Southwest, I think, was maybe a week before that, and that felt like a big turning point of that a lot of these signature in-person things were not going to be happening. And it was, kind of what happens now, yeah.
Yeah, I would echo Leigh. I think the first big thing was South by Southwest for me, which I feel like I had been gearing up for, but it was like in the weeks leading up to, it was very much like hit or miss. Like everyone was like, is this going to happen? Is this not going to happen? Like that was the first like major event. And once it actually kind of was like, this has to be canceled, I feel like that was the true realization point that it's like, okay, we're moving into a very different landscape right now as far as culture and media, and just kind of having to adjust to that not happening. And was, I think, the biggest and like the most memorable thing that happened in March, because I was like within a few weeks of everyone kind of leaving the office.
And tell us now, you know, it used to be that you'd assign reporters to like which events, you know, who to cover what event. What's it been like in both your news organizations now, in terms of how these get assigned?
I would definitely say that I'm still assigned to kind of cover the same type of event. So film festivals, advanced screenings, stuff like that. I feel like those have kind of been the easiest to kind of adapt to a virtual landscape. Obviously, you're not seeing something on the big screen anymore. Like, you don't have that opportunity to have like post-event parties and kind of discuss with, you know, other people in media what you see. But to kind of, there was already a half element of my job where I would get digital screeners for stuff anyway. So I feel like that it has just now become all it is. But I had been used, even before that, I had been used to kind of watching stuff at home digitally. And so the way that I think a lot of film festivals like Sundance, for instance, earlier this year was able to go completely virtual, I think has been very admirable. It's like been a pretty seamless transition.
Yeah, I think the kind of culture world has made a much smoother transition to that. I think the kind of party world that whether that's, you know, fashion parties and events, society events, has been much more difficult, because so much of that is about, you know, people, you know, a lot of times they're fundraisers or they're launches for partnerships or things like that, and so much of that is, you know, people getting dressed up and having their photograph taken and being at this thing in person and kind of experiencing that, and all the kind of, you know, unplanned things that can kind of happen when you have a lot of people in a room mingling kind of naturally. So I would say, yeah, for us, it's definitely been a similar assignment process for culture and you know, film festivals, things like that. I think, as Michael said, Sundance was a big opportunity for them to showcase a really big festival virtually, and I think they had a lot of success with it. It was a great they did a great job with it. I think a lot of the other kind of society things or fashion parties or things like that are still sort of it's kind of case by case in terms of assignment for us.
Great. We're starting to already get some questions from the audience, so let me dive into that. And for anyone who's new, you can just tweet out or comment with hashtag Muck Rack Live, and we'll pull it out. This question's from Sabrina. Are virtual desk sides a thing? If so, would you continue them post-pandemic?
Yes and yes. I've done a few virtual desk sides, and I have done fewer than I did in-person desk sides, but I've had really good experiences with them, and I think you know, it gives you the ability to meet with all kinds of people that are in, whether they're in London or they're in, a lot of talent seems to be in Australia and New Zealand these days, whether they're there or California or wherever. Whereas before it was, you know, meeting with people in person who are able to come to our office in New York. Obviously, it's still great to meet in person, but I think the virtual desk side has been really effective, and I would definitely continue doing that post-pandemic.
Yeah, so actually I've been like working pretty remotely for several years now, even before the pandemic. And I think that I have actually liked the fact that virtual desk sides have become a thing, because I haven't really been in an office primarily for a while. And now I think that because the majority of the rest of my team is also working from home, that they're more used to being like, oh, can you like hop on a call for this? Can you hop on a quick Zoom? Can we do a side Slack or something? Whereas I think when the majority of my coworkers were working in an office, their time was more accounted for, like, you know, minute to minute. And now with everyone kind of working at home, that's part of what everyone is doing. So it's a lot easier for me as someone who is used to working remotely, that now everyone is kind of used to doing stuff virtually. So I would definitely hope that they do continue post-pandemic, just for my sake personally.
Nice. And I've enjoyed also saving some trips. Virtual desk sides, is that the right word to use, or should people call it just like, hey, do you want to hop on a Zoom or a Zoom side, or what's the best way to refer to it?
I honestly, truly, I think virtual desk sides gets at the general idea, but I think it's just generally like a chat, just a quick little chat.
Yeah, I like virtual desk side. I think it's virtual meet and greet or anything like that, I think works well. Yeah.
Great. We had a question here from Robin Pence. Any examples of companies or organizations that are providing reporters with a unique virtual experience customized to your press needs?
I think that for us, when we cover a party, we always are doing interviews, and we want to get quotes, one-on-one interviews with talent, with people that are there, and that's obviously so much more difficult to do when you're in a virtual presentation, or you don't really get that. I covered Chanel and the Tribeca Film Festival. They always do. They have a partnership. They do a couple events together throughout the year, and they had an event this fall that is usually a lunch, and they were able to do it where they had breakout rooms it was the reporters with a celebrity kind of one-on-one on a Zoom, and you got to have a one-on-one interview that way, and that way I was as the reporter able to get unique content, unique interview, and therefore a story that was much more aligned with what I was hoping to get, and was something that I would get in person.
Yeah, I think that going off that, I think that kind of at events where you would go and there would just kind of be essentially a line of reporters waiting to talk to one person. It's like you could tell on one side that the person being interviewed is like, okay, next. Kind of, it was very impersonal in a sense. And I think that with now, with the rise of Zoom and kind of doing stuff like that, I think PR people in general are more inclined towards trying to personalize things to each individual reporter. You kind of have like, this person is going to be here for X amount of time, and it's not like sitting there like after watching a movie and they know that they now have to sit in one chair for an hour with like an endless cycle of people coming out. That I think that them kind of being on the other side of a screen, being able to kind of sit more relaxed, allows them to be a little bit more relaxed than kind of that like post event chat where it's just kind of like endless back to back, one reporter after another.
Interesting. So are you able to, do you find that you're able to kind of build the same rapport with people over Zoom that you could being in person with them in an event?
At an event, definitely. I think in general, like I said, I think the landscape of being at an event where it's just one thing after another inevitably leads itself to a bit of impersonalness, but I do still prefer actually like meeting with someone like at a cafe where they're not in a rush. I'm not in a rush of doing that in person. But I think that working through Zoom has, I think, just the other side of they get to be more comfortable, which I think allows them to get a little bit more looser and, both without kind of having to think that someone is, examining every single thing up and down, and they just can be like, okay, you can only see my head. We can just kind of talk and be very chill. So definitely when it comes to how it compares to, again, like the kind of event, talking specifically after an event, I would agree. But if I have the option to kind of meet someone at a very in-person where they're not waiting for the next person to come in, that is obviously preferable.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting to see, a lot of times I'm able to have really actually good connections with people if you're doing a one-on-one interview over Zoom, because kind of as Michael said, they're in their, whether it's their home environment or someplace that they feel comfortable. And generally then I've experienced people seem to be a little bit more relaxed at times. Definitely earlier in the pandemic, they didn't really have as many commitments. They could linger and chat with you. And there also was something, I think, throughout the beginning of the pandemic about, people just wanting to have that opportunity to talk to someone and connect with someone that was new. That was so we weren't really meeting new people anymore. And so I felt like interviews really, we're kind of going at some interesting, maybe more vulnerable or maybe more just less scripted places than they can if they're, like Michael said, doing, a long day of press, or they've shown up at this event, they're all put together, they're, got a million other things going on. So I think there has definitely been some advantage to kind of people talking on their schedule or in their home or in a space that they feel really comfortable in.
Great. We had a question earlier from Plush 9 Network over Twitter saying, super cool, Michael. How do you report on virtual fashion shows?
I mean, I feel like it's a lot. In some ways you can you get more time to sit with collections and stuff like that in a way than when you're sitting at a fashion show, the clothes zip like one way or another. And it's you don't get the opportunity to discuss atmosphere and stuff like that, which I think when I have covered fashion shows in the past, I like to talk about the atmosphere. So you miss out on that. But I think sometimes you get more of an opportunity to really look at lookbooks. And I think there's a not necessarily more opportunity to get creative, but it allows you to look at fashion in a different way when a designer can take the time to create, these huge video fashion films and stuff like that in a way that would not be possible if they were, presenting in Spring Studios, for instance. And I think that has been very interesting to see the way that designers have been able to adapt and create something that's still so tangible in a sense, that still feels exciting to be immersed in without actually having that in-person element.
A great point. And on the flip side, we have a question from Louis Braga saying, is Zoom fatigue a real thing? With a robust vaccine rollout, would you be open to attending in-person events this summer? Two very different but related questions.
I think, yes, Zoom fatigue is definitely a real thing. I think so much of what makes interesting or unique event coverage is, you want to read something that's interesting, and you want to read something that tells you something. It's not just like a light summary, or kind of how Michael was saying with atmosphere at fashion shows, atmosphere at events, and kind of those moments of taking in everything that's happening. And you just can't do that virtually. I think, there's so much about the way we kind of do our jobs day to day or our lives day to day that can be transferred online. I think events in general, the events industry really is something that does need to be in person at some point in order to kind of have the success that it has for a while, and to give reporters the opportunity to cover and fully report out a story. I think party reporting and event reporting, it is hard work. It is important, and it does tell people interesting things. And I think there's so many interesting, unique tidbits that you can get from events just by someone being there that you can go up and approach and they want to talk to you, or all of those things. So I think as vaccines are rolled out and we move forward in the pandemic, I think reporters would be interested in going back and kind of going forward and covering in-person things. And I think people also would be interested in attending things in person because it's been a lot of Zoom. So, yeah.
I mean, I would just second that. I mean, I think there have been some companies that have been able to adapt to kind of live events in a way that is impressive. I think HBO has had several premieres that kind of try to capture that in-person experience with side chats where you can talk to the other people that are there, and kind of these virtual photo booths and stuff like that, which I think has been great. But I don't think anything can compare to kind of actually being in a physical space around other people. And I, for one, am just in general ready to get back to live events and kind of being able to be around people. It's not the same to, sit in my living room and, talk to someone else who is sitting in their living room as it would be to kind of, sit next to someone on a couch in an event space, sharing a drink and kind of having that real in-person moment. And I definitely am very ready, for the vaccine rollout to kind of go on so we can return to that, because that's one of the parts of my job that I miss the most.
If I imagine a lot of event planners out there are thinking could I pull something off July or August? If you got an invite today for something in July or August, would would you take it seriously and mark it on your calendar, or would you be like, I don't know if it's gonna, if it, if the world's gonna be normal enough yet for my editor to approve me to go check this thing out?
It depends. I mean, I've had the first dose of my vaccine, so
congratulations.
I feel that I'm getting a second one in a couple of weeks, and so I mean, I would hope that July, especially once it gets to the summer in New York, where things can happen outside in large spaces and open air and still be somewhat socially distanced, and kind of still have mask components while people also have vaccines. I think I could definitely, I wouldn't say that I for sure would be like absolutely yes, but definitely like a tentative moment, a maybe to be determined.
Yeah, I think throughout the pandemic, it's been so hard things have changed so rapidly, and up and down, and it's been so hard for people to plan, and whether that's personal plans or planning any kind of event of any kind. And I think that's a large part of why brands have been hesitant to go through planning things, because then you can plan it 2 months out or 6 months out, and you have no idea what the landscape will look like at that time. This feels like the most kind of hopeful moment that we've had thus far about like, okay, feel pretty confident that moving in a direction towards it will be pretty likely that we will be able to do things. I think, the ability, as Michael said, the weather in New York makes things a huge difference. I know, there have been fashion shows that have gone on in person, but outside throughout this time. And colleagues of mine have attended that and felt safe. And events, normally you have a lot of people, which makes it difficult. But I think if you have space and you have outdoors and masks and vaccine rollout, I think there's a good chance of feeling comfortable attending.
Great, and let me ask 2 questions in a row. One is from Laura Trebold through Facebook, asking, "What's the most memorable virtual event you've worked on?" And Michael, you mentioned the HBO ones that are a great example. And then with that, also we got a question from another question from Robin Pence through LinkedIn, asking, "Can you share more about the breakout rooms? Sound interesting along the lines of what I was thinking." So I guess for each of you could just, illustrate one of these. And Michael, maybe you could tell us more to start with the HBO example of like, I don't know if you remember what software platform they used and just how exactly it worked and what made it cool.
Yeah. So recently, I wanted probably about a month ago, they had a virtual premiere for one of their new HBO Max shows, Generation. And it's like, you could come in early before the actual screening of the pilot came, and you were in kind of this virtual room, and you could kind of chat to other people that were there. You could go, and I don't exactly remember what the platform was, but you could just kind of access it on any browser. And they had kind of like a themed photo booth room where you could just kind of use your webcam to take pictures, but then it had like specifically designed like backgrounds and kind of like frames and stuff that spoke to the event, which is the kind of thing that you would, if I were to go to an in-person event for a screening like that, they would have a photo booth very similar to that. And it's, again, not the same as like doing that, but it is kind of fun to kind of get you in the mood. And then like they do the screening, and then after there was a virtual dance party that was DJ'd by this DJ Amorphous, and kind of like you could just kind of stay there and just kind of do a lot of that, and it kind of really helped to give you an somewhat immersive experience that seemed to try to replicate some of that energy you would get in a live setting, which again, it's never going to actually be the exact same. But I do think that it is an exciting way to kind of try to adjust to these unprecedented times, and it was enjoyable on those lines. And they've done, several of those for different premieres. And I think that is a very kind of refreshing thing to see. And I think has also been in the making, because when the pandemic first started, that's not what they were doing. But then a few months down, they started to get more and more involved. And you could see that they were, using that time to adjust to the circumstances.
And Leigh, any examples from your the favorite events you've checked out?
Well, sort of going back to the question she asked about more details about the breakout rooms. That Chanel Tribeca event, I think, was one of my favorite events I've covered. I believe they used Zoom, and they sent everyone beforehand a little. The event's normally like a kind of luncheon with with tea. They made it kind of like an afternoon tea thing. So they sent everyone little, things to have afternoon tea and snacks and a little tea cup and all that as a way to so all of their VIP guests had that. They were kind of encouraged to make themselves tea, acting as if it was something in person. And then there were really engaging live speakers that throughout the film industry that everyone got together and talked to, as well as then kind of for reporters, these kind of breakout interviews where you could speak to specific talent, and kind of at the beginning and at the end of the event. And having covered that event in person for several years now, it wasn't the exact same. I was in my apartment and not at the Conde Verde where it normally is, but it did mimic in many ways the content that was translated. And I think another part of there's kind of content and there's kind of the experience of putting on an event. And given that I was able to get the interviews that I wanted, that everyone seemed to be really, I think a lot of times on virtual events on Zoom, if people are logging on, there is that fatigue, or there is that the kind of hesitancy maybe, but everyone seemed to be enjoying their tea and their cookies and whatever they've been sent, and it had kind of created a nice environment and experience, and so I think it did in many ways mirror a real in-person. And it was one of my favorite to attend.
Great. We had a comment from Peter Rojas saying, I preferred limited virtual desk sides to 20 to 30 minutes and give the option up front for video or audio to be sensitive to Zoom fatigue. Do you both agree with that, or do you like them longer? Do you ever want them just audio, or are you kind of video all the time?
I will say that there are definitely times when I would not want video, that it just requires, especially working from home, sometimes it really is a day where you're just kind of rolling out of bed and not wanting to change out of your pajamas because no one's going to see you anyway. And so on a day like that, it's no, do I actually want to get up and put on an outfit or whatever to kind of talk to someone in a way that I could just talk to them over the phone, not necessarily. But as far as the timing, I mean, that really just has to do with what the desk side is about. I don't think sometimes I have to really get into the nitty gritty of, a piece I'm working on or something when I'm talking to one of my colleagues or something. And in those cases, it's it just requires more time, and I wouldn't want it to be shorter if it wasn't going to allow me to really get into what we were talking about. But I think in general, as a general rule, I don't like things to go any longer than they have to, I would say.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah, especially on Zoom, I think it's harder. It's, for things to stretch on, it just feels, it's blatantly more obvious when you're doing it on Zoom. I personally like video on when it comes to doing interviews, just because I think it more closely mimics talking to someone face to face, and it sort of can eliminate some awkwardness, especially if you're doing, I did one on Friday and I was interviewing two different people, and there was also a whole team of publicists on the line, and it was very hard, I think, for people to figure out who was talking and what time do you give to let other people talk. And so I think for group conversations or things like that, video is helpful, but I definitely understand that the other side of that is that everyone's exhausted from being on Zoom and figuring out where, people are in different places and, families and things like that going on. So I think if someone wants to do no video, I think we all understand kind of the nature of what everyone is working with.
Makes sense. We also have a question that was sent in from Olivia, one of my teammates, asking, do you feel like you're getting a more genuine interview when subjects are dialing in from their home in a more vulnerable setting?
I personally have definitely experienced this. I noticed it more, I think, would say in the first 6 months of the pandemic, and was sort of struck by, and by the nature of some of the conversations. I think everyone, whether you are, important enough to be being interviewed, or you're not famous, you're the reporter doing the interview, everyone was experiencing the same thing, and no one knew what we were experiencing and what to make of it. And it did make people more vulnerable. And I also think there was such a need for feeling good, talking about something that you're passionate about, and whether that's when it comes to interviewing people in the film world or the music world or things like that, a real appreciation for art and for the way that can make people feel and the role that it can have in our lives. And I think there's some fear around that being trivial to talk about during the pandemic, but I found the people that were promoting a film or a show or movies or music or whatever, it made them feel good to be making, to be creating, to be putting art into the world, and that is something that is necessary and that is important to talk about. And so I definitely felt people were kind of feeling that on a genuine level, and led to some very genuine interviews.
Yes, I think especially when it comes to like actual like press days, again, so kind of like a situation where someone being interviewed is expecting, multiple people to come in one after another. I definitely think that works a lot better when they're at home, because they can just in general feel more comfortable when they know they're going to have to be on for several hours talking to several different people. I think being in their own comfortable environment helps them just kind of relax a bit more than if they're just essentially sitting in a building waiting for one person to kind of rotate in after the other. But I definitely still think that, I do a lot of profiles on people. So I'm very used to kind of taking them out of those very standardized elements, kind of going to a dinner with someone or meeting someone for coffee, where there's not that kind of rushed atmosphere around that. And I think that those are still definitely the times to best be able to get vulnerability out of someone, is to really just be able to sit, talk with them face to face. But what I think in the format of typical press days, I think that if they're doing back-to-back interviews, I have been able to find them a little bit more relaxed and vulnerable when they're just kind of at home by themselves, rather than sitting up at a table for 5 hours straight.
Yeah, it makes sense. And on that note, another question that's going to require you to use your crystal balls. Paul, Martha, you ask, can you see events always having virtual components in the future? How do you think it'll work?
Yeah, so like I said, I think, Sundance this year, I believe they attracted an audience that was 3 times larger than what they're used to, because so many people from around the world were able to tune in a way that they couldn't necessarily always, travel to Utah or to Park City to kind of attend this festival. And I think that in general, access is such a huge thing that I think should be more of a conversation around kind of how we do events. Kind of film festivals are important cultural things that a lot of people don't have the access to attend. And I think that seeing the response and seeing that there definitely is a demand for people to attend these and participate in some way, even if it is from the comfort of their living room, I think has really shifted the narrative around how these events happen. So I wouldn't be surprised, thinking about film festivals, for instance, if obviously we want to get back, as a film lover myself, I would love to be in front of a big screen again and, in a dark room with no distractions. But I think for the people where that was never an option, to be able to kind of tune in from their house and still feel like they can participate was a huge thing. And I think a lot of the organizers and stuff are listening. I think that one of the Sundance people definitely spoke to how that the response and kind of the attendance really shifted the way he was thinking about things moving forward. And I think that's I would not be at all surprised if they take that into consideration even once in-person things can happen. Is that just kind of giving more access to more people is always a net positive.
Yeah, I think to me the biggest plus of virtual events has been the inclusivity and the accessibility, whether that's people can attend them from anywhere really. They and way more people, as Michael said, can experience this event, which is obviously such a huge plus. I think on the flip side of that, there's so much to me what's interesting and engaging about being a party reporter and about that kind of about those stories is getting to experience it and getting to make people feel when they're reading your story like they're there, like they're experiencing something that they can't just get from a press release or from a quick caption of a photo or something like that. We approach our party reporting. Our former editorial director, John Fairchild, had this saying about getting the bacon from an event, and you should always approach a party and try and get the bacon. And it's harder to get bacon from a virtual panel or a virtual, presentation or event or things like that. So I think, I'm certainly hopeful and excited for the opportunity to kind of, have more unexpected conversations at events, or the ability to have those kind of less planned moments that make stories really interesting. But I think definitely for the film festivals, it seems like it's a really good fit to have a large virtual element. And I would imagine a lot of events would be able to do a hybrid of kind of in-person as well as some kind of streaming where people, that are not there can attend and participate and get something from it as well.
I have another question from Catherine Dunleavy, logistical. Do you have an ideal time for a virtual event? And then also, I think she's hinting at how do you handle the time zones of you make it morning on the East Coast that it's way too early for the West Coast, or vice versa.
I think it really depends on what the event is. So like a kind of like a premiere party, like for like the HBO things, for instance, they'll usually send some kind of like thing to help you like get into the party mood. So they'll send like a press package with, like maybe like a bottle of wine or some kind of thing like that. And it's like, if that's what I'm doing, I definitely don't want to be, drinking at like 10 in the morning. But for something, like for instance, like during New York Fashion Week, when kind of all of that went virtual, the times were still kind of like staggered, and like this video or this virtual presentation was still going to air at like 10 a.m. or something. And I think that makes sense because like during a normal New York Fashion Week, I'm at shows in the morning, and sometimes they're in the afternoon. But I think for like party type stuff, I would prefer it to be in the evening. And as far as like the time zone thing, it really is complicated. There are some times where I could see it's very much catered towards the West Coast, for like very like Hollywoody type, events. And like sometimes it'll be like, okay, like this screening is like starting at 10:30 p.m. because they know that like people on the West Coast are not going to be ready, for it to start at like 7:30 Eastern time. And then it's like, okay, now my bedtime is getting a little messed up. But again, I mean, and it comes with the territory. I think I've been pretty evenly split of events that kind of are catering towards one time zone to the other. And so sometimes I'm like, okay, now it's my turn to kind of like, take one for the team and just go to bed a little later. And next time it'll probably be more catered towards the East Coast, in which case you might have to, stop working a little early or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think in general, if it's something that should have a party feel, that naturally lends itself to the evening. I will say that there are times, kind of going back to Zoom fatigue, where sort of the last thing you want to do at the end of working a full day on Zoom is attend an event on Zoom. And so I have had some like, lunchtime type things that, if it's not meant to be kind of a party where they're sending you wine or something like that works quite well. And I think there's times where I've been maybe more inclined to I can fit that into the schedule, versus like we're going to work a full day and deal with everything else going on, and then in the evening time, spend another hour on Zoom or something, which definitely feels different. Parties are normally in the evenings, but it's a little bit different going in person, I guess, than logging on to Zoom. So I think it's really event specific, and as long as if it's virtual, I think it has to be considerate of both time zones, but sort of a sweet spot where it's maybe a little awkwardly early or a little awkwardly late, but you do.
Caroline asks, says she's with us on missing in-person events, but do you think due to the pandemic, people are less likely to attend them as opposed to virtual? And I guess people in general, and also for yourselves too, do you think the fatigue is going to force more people out, or are people going to be like, hey, this virtual life is pretty good, why get on a plane again?
Hard to say, I guess, a little bit. I see both sides to it, and I sort of personally feel both sides to it. I think it'll be definitely kind of the first few out is going to feel strange, and it's going to feel maybe scary, or I don't know, but I think there's definitely ways and probably incentive for that for the people planning the events to make them feel really safe and have kind of hit the positives of having something in person, not being in person just to be in person, but definitely with benefiting from gathering in person, while making people feel safe and, they can do their jobs and not feel, anxious or stressed or worried about things. Because I think that would be the biggest success. But, I would imagine there will be a lot of people that will still want to, that the demand for virtual events won't go away, say, this summer. I think there'll definitely be a crossover period. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it'll be kind of like split, Like I said, I'm very ready to get back in person within reason, I don't want to kind of rush that and do it before it's safe. But just in general, I'm very kind of like cabin fever, like, okay, like, what's happening. And I think that particularly with the vaccine rollout happening right now, as the seasons change, like it's around this time of any year, even in a normal year, that I'm ready to be out anyway, because it's like the weather is nicer. I've been like locked up at home, snowed in, and now it's like there's sun outside. And that always is like a huge thing to kind of make you want to go outside. And so I believe that, I think there will definitely be people that are like ready once it seems to look like it's safe to kind of do that kind of stuff again, as long as the people throwing these events seem to actually be kind of taking the necessary safety precautions and enforcing them, that there will be people that are definitely ready to go out. But I also have some friends that like have loved the pandemic because they're like, I never really liked being forced to like do that stuff in the beginning, and now I don't have a reason to. And I just think that kind of it's a case by case basis, depending on kind of like what your actual attachment is into kind of in-person socializing.
Great. Well, I promise we won't force you to come into a Muck Rack Live in person. We've actually got a bunch more questions. We always end these at 45 minutes in, so this will unfortunately have to be the last question, but I'll ask you at the end to let everyone know where to follow you on social and maybe where they can ask their questions directly to you later on. Namrat Klar asks, as a fashion PR professional, what are the key factors to consider while pitching for a store launch and pop-ups?
That's a good question. I think again, I been thinking about, okay, what do store launches and pop-ups normally look like, and I think probably the same element then, when I would be considering should we cover this, should we not, would apply now, which, one of the main factors is kind of like, what are we going to get out of this experience from an editorial standpoint, and kind of beyond making it worth it, but having what are the elements that kind of make I think this will be a time where we kind of maybe are rethinking what makes events successful and what are the objectives, what are the, it's not just throwing parties just to throw parties anymore, but really opportunities for, which I'm sure that will come back at some point, opportunities to, what are we trying to get out of this event, and what are the experiences we want our guests to have, and information they want to leave with, and things like that. And so I think, definitely for store launches and pop-ups, those are things that people want to see in person and experience in person. If it's, a brick and mortar store, if it's a physical pop-up, and that is something that should probably be experienced in person. And so, I think, again, safety, and also just a uniqueness and experience, and kind of a reason for people to want to come out. I think especially at the beginning of kind of moving through this next phase of the pandemic with more vaccinations, what are kind of reasons for people to go in person, and what will that look like?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Just in general, I think that you kind of want to emphasize what is going to make it worth kind of doing this in person, kind of like what am I going to get from being in this environment that I couldn't necessarily get from being at home, which I think that easily kind of lends itself, particularly with regards to pop-ups, that is kind of a, physical experience. But I think also just one of the big things that is going to be is in this time right now is kind of really indicating your efforts to kind of follow COVID guidelines and kind of safety protocol, and kind of including that with kind of how that's going to be enforced, or what that's going to look for in order to kind of assuage people who might be somewhat reluctant to kind of go out into these physical spaces at a time when it could still be considered somewhat dangerous to do so, is kind of how you're going to ensure that your event, your pop-up, your store launch, or whatever is going to be making sure that everyone who attends will be safe.
Hey, Leigh, where can we find you online or follow you on social?
Yeah, I am at Leigh_Nordstrom on Twitter, and also at www.com/I for all of our coverage.
And Michael, where can we find and follow you?
So I'm on Twitter at YoSoyMichael. I'm on Instagram at Michael Cubie, just my first and last name, and free to search my name at them.us or at NYLON.com to read my work. And yes, thank you all for tuning in.
Wonderful. Leigh, Michael, this is great. Thanks so much for showing on this panel. We got tremendous engagement in the questions, so it's very valuable. Thanks so much, and look forward to following more of your work, and maybe even seeing you at an in-person event sometime in the future.
I hope so. Thank you so much. Such a pleasure. And thanks, everyone, for sending in the questions.
Yes, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure.